Hello, and welcome to Chapter 7 of Learning Theories by Dale E. Shunk. This is Module 4.2 on the cognitive learning processes. I am Amy Sima-Dirham, and I will be presenting the first part. So you're going to see these presentations in three different parts. I'm going to take us here on the beginning. We're going to talk a little bit about the previous chapters covered cognitive theories, and those theories of learning, social cognitive, information processing, and constructivism. And then this chapter extends this perspective into uh, cognitive processes during learning. Now, we as educators know the importance of concept learning, transfer, metacognition, problem solving, and that these topics should be incorporated into instruction. So that's what we are going to delve into in this section, in this part. On a side note, I just want to clarify that I do not own the images. They are borrowed Google images for this presentation. All right, let's talk about the objectives here for Chapter 7, Part 1. When we are finished here, you should be able to distinguish between general and specific skills and discuss how they work together in the acquisition of competence. You should be able to describe novice to expert research methodology, understand why conditional knowledge is important for learning, and discuss variables affecting metacognition. And lastly, you should be able to distinguish properties of concepts and explain models of concept learning. Skill acquisition. Developing competence in any domain represents a process of skill acquisition. Skills can be differentiated according to degree specificity. So we start off with two different types of skills. We have general skills and specific skills. General skills apply to a wide variety of disciplines. They involve problem solving and critical thinking. They're useful in acquiring a range of cognitive and motor and social skills. And then specific skills are only useful in certain domains. I pulled this example from the text because I thought it was very clear in helping understand specific skills. The idea that factoring polynomials and solving square root problems involve specific skills because they have limited mathematical applications. So specific skills will have limited applications. So general skills aid in learning in many ways. Examples may include attention, memory, persistence. They can be applied to something like learning chemistry as well as to play a musical instrument. Specific skills are then applied to a specific domain, and domain specificity refers to discrete declarative knowledge and or procedural knowledge. Domain specificity is a concept that suggests some cognitive functions are solely responsible for individual functions and not multiple ones. Different areas of cognition are referred to as domains. So to kind of go back and kind of give an example of a specific skill, that would be the ability to read music or to build a car engine. Both general and specific skills are involved in learning. In addition to the use of these skills, some local knowledge is needed. For instance, one cannot become skilled at fractions without learning rules governing fraction operation. Olson advanced a model of skill acquisition through practice made up of three sub-functions: generate task-relevant behaviors, identify errors, and correct errors. And what's important to note is this model includes both general and task-specific skills. As teachers work with students, We can effectively teach general skills to increase success in various domains, but we must also be aware of specific skills that are needed for learning when it comes to a specific domain. Moving on to the idea of novice to expert research methodology. With the growth of cognitive and constructivist views of learning, researchers have become interested in students' beliefs and thought processes during learning. To investigate academic learning, many researchers have used this, a novice to expert methodology, with the following steps. First, we need to identify a skill to be learned. Next, we need to find an expert, someone who performs the skill well, very knowledgeable in the area. And then you have to have a novice, someone who does maybe knows something, but maybe little about the task, or cannot perform it very well. The final step is really determine how do we take that learner who is a novice and move them to the expert level as efficiently as possible. This basic idea is that if you want to understand how to become more skillful in an area, closely study someone who performs that skill well. In doing so, you can learn what knowledge he or she possesses, what procedures and strategies are useful, how to handle difficult situations, troubleshooting, and even how to correct mistakes. This model then has many real world counterparts and is reflected in apprenticeships, on the job training, and mentoring. And the image I chose for there, you can see a bunch of novices looking at how a car is run. And we have the expert there showing them how to perform the skill and to share their knowledge about that and pass it down. The question is, though, what are the differences between an expert and novice? So, scientifically, when you look at, you take someone who you want to move from the novice to the expert level, what are the differences you look for? Well, a few domains that differ are often the organization of knowledge and how much declarative knowledge a learner has. A novice may classify a problem based on superficial features, whereas an expert may classify a problem based on the principle needed to solve the problem. Also, experts tend to allocate more of their time to the early or preparatory stages of problem solving, whereas novices tend to spend relatively more of their time on the later stages. These approaches to problem solving will be discussed later in this chapter. Conditional knowledge and metacognition. Some challenges with information processing theories is that they primarily describe learning rather than explaining it. So we need an explanation for why the system processes information. So this is where we look at conditional knowledge. Conditional knowledge is understanding when and why to employ forms of declarative and procedural knowledge. It helps students select and use these types of knowledge to fit task goals. Conditional knowledge is also an integral part of self regulated learning. Self regulated learning requires that students decide which learning strategy to use prior to engaging in a task. When comprehension problems are detected, students alter their strategy based on conditional knowledge of what might be more effective. I really like the visual on this slide. It breaks it down very clear into um, each little nugget of information. Declarative knowledge, knowing what. Procedural knowledge, knowing how. Conditional knowledge brings in that piece of knowing when and why. Metacognition. Cognition about cognition. Did I just blow your mind? Metacognition refers to the deliberate, conscious control of cognitive activity. So, at its core, it is cognition about cognition or thinking about thinking. There are a lot of different parts to this. First, we're going to look at metacognition and learning. Metacognition refers to the deliberate, conscious control of cognitive activity. So, there are two skills involved here. Skill number one must understand what skills, strategies, and resources a task requires. Okay? Skill two, one must know how and when to use these skills and strategies to ensure the task is completed successfully. I picked this image for this slide because I know, particularly in my field and what I teach, we talk a lot about 21st century learning. And these four areas in 21st century learning are a wonderful representation of metacognition. We must understand what skills a resource task requires. Is it, do we need help? Is there collaboration? Is it, do we need to communicate in a certain way? Bring in our creativity, critical thinking. And then once we know what skills, do we then know how and when to use them to complete a task? So going back to skill one, an example of skill one might be finding main ideas, forming associations or images, using memory techniques to organize material, taking notes. Other skills under skill two might be to check the level of understanding one has, predict outcomes, maybe evaluate the effectiveness of the efforts, taking a look at how to budget one's time, or if there are any revisions that may need to happen. Teachers really can help students develop their metacognitive skills. A teacher working with students, say on listening comprehension, might ask the students why they are listening. Are you listening for enjoyment? Are you listening for themes within the story? Are you listening for specific elements? Are there directions involved? Or are there facts and concepts? Kuhn argued that metacognitive skills were the key to the development of critical thinking. So there are variables that influence metacognition. Metacognitive awareness is influenced by the learner's variables, task variables, and strategy variables. So, learner variables. Learners' level of development influences their metacognition. Older children understand their own memory and abilities and limitations much better than younger children. Task variables, what you know about the nature of a task and the processing demands required to complete the task. So, what needs to be done? What do you have to have in order to have that task completed? And then lastly, it's the strategy variables. What you know about different strategies you can apply to successfully complete a task. Or, in other words, making yourself a plan. For example, putting these three things together. A student may use knowledge in planning how to approach a math exam. I know that I have difficulty with word problems, okay? Learner variable, that's my level of development, being aware of my thinking about my thinking. I do know that I have to complete this math exam. So I am going to need to know knowledge in that area. But since I have a difficulty with word problems, I may answer the computational problems first and save the word problems for last. So that would be my strategy as the student, that I think might give me the best success in order to complete my task. On this slide, we're going to take a brief look at metacognition and its relation to behavior, and then metacognition and reading and comprehension. Students need to be taught a menu of activities ranging from those applying to learning in general to those applying to specific situations, and they need to be encouraged to use them in various contexts. Although the what component of learning is important, so are the when, where, and why. Teaching the what without the why can confuse students. Students who know what to do but not when, where, or why may hold low self-efficacy and may not perform well. So that ties in the behavior aspect of metacognition. Now, when we're looking at metacognition and reading, metacognition is relevant to reading because it is involved in understanding and monitoring reading purposes and strategies. Skilled readers do not approach all reading tasks identically. Children develop metacognitive abilities through interactions with adults, parents, teachers. An effective teaching procedure includes informing children of the goal, making them aware of information relevant to the task, and reminding them of their goal progress. Some strategies for this is the reciprocal teaching. This is where the teacher and students take turn teaching. Often the teacher might model the activity first, much like this presentation process we are all doing. Then there are also programs. For example, the Self-Regulated Strategy Development Program combines strategy instruction with self-regulated instruction in reading. And then the concept-oriented reading instruction program, or CORI, incorporates cognitive strategy instruction on activating background knowledge, questioning, searching for information, summarizing. This program has been extremely effective in raising students' comprehension. This brings us to concept learning. So how does one learn a concept? Well, there is a nature of concepts in order to understand the breakdown and hierarchy and configurations. So what are concepts? They are labeled sets of objectives or objects, symbols, or events that share common characteristics or critical attributes. A concept is a mental construct or representation of a category that allows one to identify examples and non-examples of the category. So let's go through some of these bullet points below here. Conjunctive concept. That's when we're looking at an object and stating two or more features. For example, a motorcycle must have two wheels and an engine and handlebars. I think we would all agree that we would have to have those things to have a concept of a motorcycle. Disjunctive concept is having one of two or more features. So disjunctive refers to objects that sometimes could be either or. So to belong, an item must have this feature or that feature. Example, in the game of baseball, a strike is either a swing and a miss, or a pitch down the middle, or a foul ball. It has to be one of those things in order to be the concept of a strike. The either or quality of disjunctive concepts does make them more difficult to learn. Now, a relational concept, something might be larger, above, to the left, north, upside down. These are all relational concepts. Another example is a sister. I am a sister. What is a sister? It is a female, and my relation to another person depends on my having the same parents as that person. That is a relational concept. Then we have two theories in play here. We have the feature analysis theory, rules that define the critical features. We observe individual characteristics of every object and pattern we encounter. So we were looking at the features of that object. Then there is prototype theory, which is a generalized image of the concept. Um, there is a graded degree of belonging to this conceptual category. Some members are more central than others in the prototype theory. For example, a chair is more prototypical to the concept of furniture than, say, a lamp. So that is an example of that. So how, in this nature of concepts, does one attain concepts? What is happening here? There are multiple ways to learn and modify concepts. I will be focusing on Klaus-Meyer's tested model of concept attainment. Competence at each level in this four-stage sequence is necessary and important for attainment before moving on to the next level. The process concept of attainment represents the interaction of development, informal experiences, and formal education. So here is the four-stage sequence. Number one, concrete level. Learners can recognize an item as the same one previously encountered when the spatial orientation is the same. What does this mean? For instance, I would be able to identify an equilateral triangle from a right triangle, okay? Or I would see an equilateral triangle early on, and when I see a second one, I can identify that's an equilateral triangle based on the image. Identity is to recognize an item as the same one previous when the item is observed from a different perspective or modality. So now the learner can recognize equilateral triangles from different orientations or positions. Then we have the classificatory stage, where I can recognize at least two items as being equivalent. There might be a small equilateral triangle and a large equilateral triangle, but I can tell that they are the same, even though they may be different in size. And then lastly is formal, meaning I would be able to identify examples and non-examples of the concept. So mastery of this level, formal level, requires the learner to apply a set of higher order thinking processes, such as use of hypothesis, evaluating and inferring. So that would be looking at that equilateral triangle, and I would be able to recognize that it has three equal sides and three equal angles. That would be getting into that formal level of concept attainment. This model has instructional implications for learners at various points in development. And so that is what is going to lead us into the teaching of concepts, which is what we are responsible for as teachers. This slide looks very busy. In putting it together, I found myself going back and forth between a couple different sets of notes and wishing they were all right in front of me. So that's really what I did. I put all of the information on this on one slide. We're going to kind of tackle each section. There is a model of concept teaching steps above here, and it is very clinical in the way it is written. And I'm going to read it to you first exactly as written, because I think you have to have familiarity with that terminology. And then we're going to break it down as to what some of those individual steps mean and make that information more attainable. Ha ha ha, no pun intended. So it's more user friendly, and we have to teach it. How do we teach it? Let's make this more of a can do type of situation with this information. So the model of concept teaching steps, here they are. First, determine the structure of the concept to include superordinate, coordinate, and subordinate concepts and identify the critical and variable attributes. Next, define the concept in terms of critical attributes and prepare several examples from each coordinate concept. Third, arrange the examples in sets based on the attributes and ensure that the examples have similar variable attributes within any set containing examples from each coordinate concept. Lastly, order and present the sets in terms of the divergence and difficulty of the examples, and order the examples within any set according to the learner's current knowledge. Woo, you got all that? All right, here we go. First things first, most concepts can be represented by a hierarchy. So you have the subordinate, which is the higher concept. You have the subordinate, which is a lower concept. And then you have coordinate concepts, which they may be similar and be at the same level. Well, there was this great example, and I put it in this peach box here. We're going to kind of go through and talk about what all of this breaks down to. So let's look at the concept of the domestic cat. I have 4 cats. They're all looking at me now as I give you this presentation, so I don't want to mess this part up. The superordinate concepts: cat family, mammal. Okay, so those are the hierarchy. We're looking at the hierarchy. This is kind of like a higher concept. Then subordinate concepts. There are various breeds of cats: the short hair cat, the ragdoll, the Siamese. Then you have coordinate concepts: the lion, the jaguar. All right, they're still in the cat family, they're still in mammals, but I wouldn't want a lion or jaguar as a pet. Then we have critical attributes, attributes that they all would share: paws, teeth. Then we have the variable attributes that might change from each individual cat: hair length, eye color. And then you'd be able to put it together in a set and identify what is not an example of a domestic cat, which might be a deer or a dog or a snake. Concept learning involves identifying attributes, then generalizing them into examples, and then discriminating examples from non-examples, in a nutshell. The use of concept maps that you see down left here, or knowledge maps, diagrams that represent the ideas and link them together, this could be extremely helpful with students' knowledge retention when teaching a concept. The other factor in play for the learner is motivational process. We go back to that motivational process again. This is something that is not new in our discussion. I'm sure we will continue to have this discussion moving forward. Looking at the learner's goals, expectations, needs. To teach concepts, we may have to involve with hands-on learning or group discussions or ask questions to gain insight into the students' minds, so that we can help motivate them. The role of motivation is critical to concept learning. So in summary, literature suggests that conceptual change involves the interaction of students' cognitions and motivational beliefs. Rather than us as teachers simply providing knowledge, we should take students' pre-existing ideas into account when planning instruction and including motivation for learning. I want to thank you very much for listening. I hope you took away something from this presentation and you feel like you have some information to use. Please stay tuned for the other parts of Chapter 7. Have a good evening or afternoon.